And so feedback really is a gift, right? And often we're so uncomfortable giving feedback to folks.
Hey, everybody, we're talking to Kelly Harrison today. What an amazing woman. She is a retired Navy commanding officer, decorated helicopter pilot, and the founder of Mindfully Crafted Solutions, empowering leaders in the defense tech world. She has some incredible stories of surviving a helicopter crash, leading high-stakes missions, and transforming organizational cultures. She's a great new friend of mine. You don't want to miss this incredible conversation.
Welcome to The Last 10%. Your host, Dallas Burnett, dives into incredible conversations that will inspire you to finish well and finish strong. Listen as guests share their journeys and valuable advice on living in the last 10%. If you are a leader, a coach, a business owner, or someone looking to level up, you are in the right place. Remember, you can give 90% effort and make it a long way, but it's finding out how to unlock the last 10% that makes all the difference in your life, your relationships, and your work. Now, here's Dallas.
Welcome. I am Dallas Burnett, sitting in my 1905 Koch Brothers barber chair in Thrive Studios. But more importantly today, we have a great guest. Kelly Harrison is a true trailblazer. She is a retired Navy commanding officer with 21 years of service and a decorated helicopter pilot known as Grandma Spoons, which we will get into, and the founder of Mindfully Crafted Solutions, where she coaches executives and transform teams in the defense tech space. She's been recognized as one of NBC Washington's powerhouse women in leadership and was a finalist in the 2024 U.S. Forces in Business Awards. So welcome to the show, Kelly.
Thank you so much for having me, Dallas. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for your service, and we just appreciate you for that. And I feel like I just have to start by saying you've got to tell us a little bit about Grandma Spoons. What's behind the Grandma Spoons?
Absolutely. Let's kick it off with the fun stuff, right?
Yeah.
So obviously in Naval Aviation, we have a tradition of giving each other call signs. And early on in my career, I earned the call sign Spoons. I don't want to tell the whole story in mixed company, but suffice to say, it involved a bar, a pair of spoons being played by an Irish singer accompaniment, and my entire squadron getting kicked out. Later on in my career, the grandma part got added, and that occurred. I joined my new squadron while they were on deployment. They were actually supporting efforts to help Japan following the Fukushima disaster.
Wow.
And we pulled into Thailand. And while we were pulling into Thailand, I got the illustrious responsibility of the 3 a.m. flight brief to fly anti-terrorism force protection as the ship pulled into the port. As you can imagine, my first night in port, I was pretty tired. And so while everyone else decided to go out into town and enjoy the town that we were in, I decided to go to bed around 10 o'clock. And I woke up when everybody came home to a JO standing over me and saying, "Is she really asleep? What a grandma!" And another JO yelling, "Grandma, that's such a great call sign." And the rest is history.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. I love that story. Man, you've been all over the world with your service. And how were you engaged did you eventually, you guys get to help in Japan with Fukushima and all that? I mean, what was that like? I can't even, how do you support that effort? Because I mean, that's next level.
So I actually joined the squadron right at the tail end of all of that effort. I met them in Sasebo, Japan. I flew through Narita Airport on the way down there. And so I heard a lot of the stories. I myself did not actually participate in those relief efforts, but I know that the squadron made a huge impact. We had one JO that actually could speak Japanese, and so supported with translation efforts. And basically the helicopters would go in and deliver supplies and do another number of other missions, try to figure out where people needed help to support the Japanese government that way, and did a lot of really rewarding things during that.
It's amazing. It's amazing because that you heard a lot on the news about that disaster, but I had no idea that we had, you know, Navy people on the ground, Navy officers on the ground helping, delivering, and I mean, you just didn't hear about that. You didn't hear about that part of it, or at least I didn't. It wasn't as prevalent. You heard about all the bad stuff, but you don't hear about all the good stuff. So that's fascinating. Well, tell me a little bit about how you got in, because being a commanding officer and a helicopter pilot, that's amazing. Were you always inspired to be in aviation, or you always wanted to kind of be in the military? How did you get into that?
So, funny story. I really, really wanted to go to Notre Dame. And as you
Nice.
can imagine, the price tag on an education at Notre Dame was pretty hefty. And so I
Yes.
looked at a lot of different opportunities that were out there. My dad was actually active duty still when I started college and when I was applying to colleges. So I looked at the service academies and I looked at ROTC. And for
Mhm.
me, ROTC really seemed like the best fit. And so that's how
Mm.
I ended up getting a spot at Notre Dame with an ROTC scholarship. And the
Wow.
Navy paid for my education. And so I consider myself extremely fortunate to have such a great education, the opportunity to go into the Navy. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I was very concerned about the commitment because I really was fascinated by Google and I was a math and computer science major, really wanted to go into the tech sector, which comes into play
Oh,
later on in my life.
wow.
But I ended up going aviation. And despite the longer commitment, it turned out to be a really great move. And I just loved almost every minute of in helicopter aviation. So it was a really, really fantastic opportunity that came my way.
Oh, that's so cool. And for those of you that are listening, can't see, she's got "Play Like a Champion" on a sign on her wall right behind her shoulder. So she is definitely Notre Dame. It just reminds me of Rudy when we talk about Notre Dame. I was able to share Rudy, the movie, with my daughters for the first time this past year. They're like, "Oh, this is pretty cool." They will bear through football games with me. They like certain teams because I like them, but they liked the movie Rudy, and that was cool. So yeah, I can't say Notre Dame without thinking about Rudy. So well, let's talk a little bit about this because I want to dive into your incredible story, because that is really how we connected. I actually saw that people are invited onto the last 10% through a lot of different ways, but your story, actually, you made a post about it, and one of our former guests, actually Mace, liked your post and it popped up in my feed, and I saw this little short post and I was like, that's the most incredible thing ever. We have got to get Kelly on the show to talk about this. So tell us about, first, what it's like to be, kind of pilot a helicopter and be a Navy commander. But then I want to pivot into really setting up the story of what you actually went through as a part of that.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm excited to dive into that. I think one of the things that's really important to share about being a helicopter pilot in general is this concept of developing technical expertise, right? So the first, 5 to 6 years of your career is really focused on learning. And pretty much almost the entirety of your first tour in an operational squadron is all about learning how to fly the helicopter and how to employ the helicopter in different
Mm.
tactical missions. So you have to learn all of the equipment on the helicopter, all of the systems, how they all work together. I will never forget, we have different milestones that we have to reach, and one of them is to become a certified co-pilot for different missions. And in my board for that, one of the department heads, the middle managers, who was a test pilot, so very, very technically oriented, the question that he asked me was, I am a fuel particle. How do I turn into NR? So I had to talk
Oh
about
my
all, and NR
gosh.
is the speed of the rotors spinning around. So how do you take a fuel particle, go through the fuel system to get to the engines, run through combustion, then go out the transmission and go up into spinning the transmission around. Technical expertise is heavily valued. But
Mm.
one of the biggest lessons that I learned throughout my career as a helicopter pilot, which is actually something that I really struggled with because I do have such an analytical mind,
Mm.
concept of relationships and
Mm.
how relationships are so instrumental to getting anything done. And so there's kind of this continuum of learning, right, that occurs in most organizations as you move up the leadership ladder to where technical expertise is where you really have to thrive. And then as you start getting more and more senior, you really need to thrive in the organizational expertise realm. That I feel like in the Navy is accelerated because the organizational expertise and the leadership starts really from day one, potentially, as you join your first squadron or your ship in the operational Navy.
I think that's a great point that you start with, because I think that is so relevant, not only in the military, but also outside the military, because you've got a lot of people that have extremely technically oriented backgrounds, just like what you were talking about at Notre Dame. You were interested in this, the coding and the tech, the Google and all these things coming along. And so you have computer programmers or coders or developers, you've got engineers, you've got architects and designers. All these they're very, whether it's medicine or engineering or software engineering, whatever, you've got so many technical people. And we've seen and experienced that. I know you have too, people that thrive in the technical environment that struggle in the leadership environment. And they're so good at the technical aspects of their role. And you can be even a business owner at this point. You can be a technical person that's ultimately owns your own business, that you struggle with relationships. And then I think it really hampers your ability to either build something great, bigger than yourself, or grow into something where you're leading something bigger than yourself. So that's fascinating that you start with that in terms of having a technical mind, but balancing that with the need for relationships and that component in leadership. So I'm excited to see. So as you develop in your technical expertise and you move through this kind of the system, the military system, and you become a helicopter pilot after you've gone through these years of learning. Tell us about your career in that, and then we'll move into your story in that.
Sure. So after your first tour, one of the highly valued roles that you can move into is, we call it production, like producing new pilots, basically. And so it's really going to be a flight instructor. And so for me personally, everything that I loved about my community was kind of the graduate level mission types that we were doing. And so where I wanted to instruct was at that schoolhouse that really helped operational squadrons develop their pilots in those skills. So we had schoolhouses that would fly both instructional flights as well as, we call them check flights, so milestone flights to certify someone for the next level. And so that was where I elected to go. And then beyond that, I went through a period where I actually resigned from the Navy. It was actually right after the accident that we're going to talk about, the big story later in the show. And part of that was a fear that at that point in my career, the jobs I was being offered would have taken me out of the cockpit. And I was concerned that it would be really hard for me to get back into the cockpit. And so thankfully, due to a really engaged leader that I had, I was actually able to take a set of orders to keep flying. And then I went into my department head tour. I went to Memphis, Tennessee to learn about career development and how to make sure that we develop our officers in different ways moving through their careers so that they can take on more leadership challenges later on in their career. And then was lucky enough to get selected for a command. I took a turn at Eisenhower School, which is where I ended up finally getting pregnant, which was a really great milestone for our family. And then with a young baby, went into command of a helicopter squadron in Norfolk, Virginia. And then as I was moving into what I believed was going to be my final tour, I really prioritized doing something a little bit more technical. And so I went into an acquisition role and was able to work a little bit in the technical side, which was really fun. And that set me up really well to move into a defense tech startup after I retired from the Navy as a technical program manager.
My goodness. So I love how you balance it, because your career was such a mix of this technical expertise, like what you talk about, translating that technical expertise into other individuals when you talk about producing pilots, the production side of things.
Yep.
And also in being able to create pilots that could take on leadership roles. So it almost sounded like as you go up, as you rose in the production side, it wasn't just about this tacit transfer of this knowledge of how to fly a helicopter, but more about, I am going to transfer these skills of leadership to you so that you can lead in the Navy. And I think that's a really cool transition, because then when you come out, you move into the private sector. And we can definitely talk about that transition in a bit. But we've got to jump back, because you hit on something that we got to go back to and cover now. And that is your story about this accident. And I will say that I have flown in helicopters a few times. And I have to say that flying in a plane, which I do often and have done often, I always feel, I think everybody, unless you fly every week, you definitely get the jitters a little bit, some more than others, but you take it off and you're like, okay, here we go. We're going up, and you go up. Now, I love flying, so I'm cool with it, but I always feel like a plane I feel very comfortable in. But the first time I went up in a helicopter, I was like, wow, if this is just a different experience. It just feels a little more edgy. I just felt very aware that if those blades over my head stopped turning, that this was not good. And so I want to start that by saying, so that is a reality that I experienced on my first flight in a helicopter, but it's something that you actually navigated. So tell us a little bit about your story as it relates to this event that you had to navigate.
Yes. While I was actually a production instructor, an instructor in the weapons school in San Diego, one of the squadrons reached out and asked for support while they were underway. So they were embarked on a carrier out offshore from San Diego doing a combined exercise. And they wanted to get one of their pilots a check ride, so to promote him to the next milestone and level of instructing inside the aircraft. And so I went out and met the squadron on the ship, and we launched on this mission called a long-range CSAR. And as you can imagine, with long range, at the point where the story begins, we had been flying for about 6.5 hours. We had refueled out in El Centro, and we actually went to a place where we got pizza. So we had full bellies, we'd eaten dinner. It was pitch black, overcast layer, so full of clouds, and it was low illumination. Even if the moon had been visible, there wasn't a whole lot of light coming from the moon. So it was really, really, really dark. And we were over water. So not a whole lot of horizon, not a lot to look at. And all of a sudden, there's the shutter through the aircraft, and the nose starts to kick out to the left. So we're moving through the air like a windmill. The nose is stuck out to the left. And my co-pilot was actually flying at the time. I actually teased him a little bit, and I said, "Hey, Scott, the ball is knocking on the side of the aircraft. What are you going to do about it?" And he was like, "I know, I'm trying to fix it, and I can't." And so at that point, I took the controls and I ran my feet through the full left and right limits of the pedals to try to get the nose to move, and nothing happened. And so one thing led to another. This really strong grinding noise started, like a broomstick going through a garbage disposal. We had two people on board the aircraft who were actually not helicopter aviators. They were a jet pilot and a jet NFO who had been our survivors for the mission. So we had 7 total souls on board, and one thing led to another. The grinding stopped. It got really, really quiet, and the nose went from stuck left to swinging out to the right. And so we had a couple of other indications that led me to believe that our tail rotor had come off. And so there's an emergency procedure for that. Most of it is from memory. I called out the words that begin that emergency procedure. And every single person inside the aircraft who had a responsibility at that point executed flawlessly. So, Scott, my co-pilot, got the engines off right when he was supposed to. And interestingly enough, this is the importance of the brief, or setting your team up for success through preparation and making sure everyone is on the same page, right? I had briefed that we should pull the PCLs off, in the flare. I think it was in the flare. Let me make sure I get the story right. And Scott was used to briefing that he would pull the PCLs off before the flare. So once we're in the descent, we've confirmed that it is a loss of tail rotor drive, then you would pull the engines off at that point. And so he waited to pull the engines off. And when he said he was pulling the engines off, it prompted me that we needed to flare.
Let me catch up on this, because there's a lot. There's just a lot going on right here. I got to pause you for a second.
Okay.
So first of all, the helicopter turns, when you say the nose to the left, I mean, you're flying, you're flying straight, but you're pointed to the, and you're actually teasing the pilot at this time. I'm impressed, because I think that would not be my response. I would probably have to check what I said, because it'd be like, turn this thing around. What the heck are you doing? And I think your poise in that situation is incredible. The second thing is, when did you realize, like you said, you pushed your feet into the pedals to see what, I guess, the feel of what was going on?
Mhm.
Is that the point that you realized, I guess, are we at the point where did you ever have a moment where you were like, uh-oh, this is really bad? Was that at that moment that you kind of felt that, or you never?
I would say actually the moment when that happened, so we had a stuck left. I actually, sorry, we did the pedals through the full range, and so then I knew we had a controllability issue, and I thought that's just
Mm.
what it was, that there was something going on, and so we elected to turn the aircraft around and head back towards Coronado at that point.
Oh,
We were in dash 2, so we had a wingman, and when we turned around, they turned around and joined behind us. So we kinda switched
okay.
places, we took the lead, which is
Okay.
pretty typical in aviation.
So you had kind of radioed them and said, there's an issue here. We're just going to take it back.
Yeah, so I said, "We're turning around, we're experiencing some controllability issues," were the words I actually used, and
I'll say.
they came back and they were like, "What sort of controllability issues are you having?" And I said, "I think we have a loss of tail rotor control." And then as soon as I said that, this grinding noise that I mentioned started,
Yeah.
and then a chip light came on. There's a bunch of gearboxes up the tail, and one of the gearboxes was telling us that it had metal particles running around inside the gearbox, which
Oh,
is obviously
not
inside of a transmission. You don't want a bunch of metal particles in there. And so that's what that light was telling us. And I think that was the point at which I was like, "Oh, crap."
uh-oh. Oh, yeah. Oh, crap. Oh, my gosh. So, all right. So things get really serious. But you mentioned that's why briefings are so important. When you were saying briefings and you were saying there was a timing issue of when normally one person was used to doing this procedure that has to do with flaring
Mhm.
or something. I'm not sure if I say that right. And then you were saying it was a different way and you had briefed on that. When you say briefing, were you briefing that before?
Mhm.
So you guys had this conversation about what you would do in this scenario even before you got in the plane,
We did. It
the
is
helicopter. Yeah.
That's right. So this particular emergency is often many helicopter pilots believe that it's like the worst case scenario, particularly if it happens at night. And so we often will brief this emergency in our flight brief before we walk to the aircraft, just in case something like it happens, because there is no time to talk about it. It's one of those that you really have to react immediately or things will go south quickly.
That's incredible. So you literally talked through this thing before you got on the chopper, and that is exactly what happened. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So now let's go back into the cockpit.
Okay.
This has just happened. You've realized that we had the oh crap moment, and now everybody's kind of moving in the action. And you said that this procedure happened, and because of the briefing, did he respond in the manner that you had briefed? Is that what
Yes,
he did respond in that manner? So because of the briefing, he responded the way. And did that end up being significant?
it did, because if he had pulled the engines off sooner than that, I would have, in my head, wondered if I was doing something wrong. That would have just been my reaction, and that, like,
Mm,
maybe it would have been time to flare. And this particular flight maneuver, you need to be pretty precise on when you transition into the flare, which is where we're pulling the nose back and lifting the collective up. I don't want to get too far into the aerodynamics, but basically you're slowing your forward momentum and slowing your rate of descent simultaneously. So if you start that too soon, as you can imagine, that can be catastrophic because you'll build that descent rate again later and you won't
yes.
have that ability to cushion yourself on the way down.
Oh my gosh. So what you're trying to do is, are you saying that you're trying to time this so that you kind of softly hit the water ultimately? I
Yes.
mean, because you're saying you're slowing the forward motion, and I understand what you're saying. I think because when you're lifting up that, it's almost like you're trying to. It's like a slow down both things at once, right when you hit, so that or right before you hit, so that you don't have a long descent where you just go straight down a long way.
Mhm.
Kind of the idea of it. I mean,
That's
that's
Yep.
but that timing, yeah, that would be that's insane. And oh, by the way, you're doing this with all the lights flashing, no tail rudder, and it's pitch black outside, and you got to have all these people on board do that at the same time. Yeah, that's intense. That's ridiculous. So he does what he's supposed to do, and then what happens?
So let's see. So the other thing that you do in the flare, the co-pilot who's not on the controls, doesn't have their hands on the controls, they will release their emergency jettison their window, right, to make egress, so to escaping the helicopter easier. And so when Scott did that with his window, when you're driving down the road in one of those old minivans that had the like manual open the window, pop it out, and you would do that, and there would be the sound like popping in the car.
Yes.
So it was like that times like 50. That was the sound that happened. And so at that moment, I knew that he had his window out, and I got a little bit jealous. And so I actually did something that you're not supposed to, and I took one of my hands off the controls and popped my window out to try and help myself on the way down, and then put my hands back on the controls, kept going. We ended up impacting the water with the tail wheel first, and we talked a little bit about the goal. The goal and the kind of knowledge within the community at that time was that you really were trying to go for 0-0, 0 forward motion and 0 descent when you hit the water.
Yeah.
It was nighttime, and I had a lot more forward motion on the aircraft, which later we found out turned out to be a good thing, but it was 100% accidental that it happened this way. So we still have some forward motion on, the tail wheel hits the water, and because the tail wheel hits and then the main mounts come down, the whole aircraft flipped tail over nose. So we're going through, we hit the water, and then the tail pops up and we cartwheel into the water and are immediately like submerged.
It's like a tuck and roll procedure here.
Yes.
Except with a whole helicopter.
Yes. Luckily, though, the aircraft floated for a good, I don't know exactly how long, but long enough for folks to get out. And I remember when I first popped up, I like pushed my feet down a little bit and it hit something. And I kid you not, my first thought was like, oh, hell no, that better not be a shark.
Oh my goodness.
It wasn't.
When you got out of the helicopter, you put your foot down and it touched something? Oh.
It turned out it was the main mount, so the wheel of the helicopter, like one of the forward 2 wheels. So I actually stood up on it, which turned out to be great because I was wearing a loaner vest. And so I'd had a little bit of trouble with a couple of things. So I was able to like stand up on the wheel and inflate my vest and get myself situated. Our wingman that I mentioned that was right behind us immediately was overhead and started rescuing everybody that had been on the aircraft. And so we were really lucky. We all got rescued really quickly. And so really quickly for this means I think it took about 45 minutes total. But if you think about it, you've got one swimmer from the other aircraft that's in the water as the rescue swimmer. You've got to take each of us, all 7 of us, one at a time up a hoist. And he's got to swim back and forth to the hoist to help us get rescued. So it does take a while.
So the other helicopter that's following you at this point obviously sees this all go down and is, oh gosh. And so then they go into their, I guess, procedure, which is search and rescue. Mm-hmm. And they're sending one person down on a line that is supposed to go and swim out to you while they hover above and then transport everybody back up on their helicopter.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah, he was amazing.
Gosh.
He was amazing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And so then and there was enough room on the other helicopter for everybody to load up.
Yep, we huddled up, we wrapped up in wool blankets, and we went back to the ship because it was closest.
No, everybody survived the crash.
Yes.
And helicopter is upside down, and it stayed up long enough for you to be able to stand up on it, and that's incredible. What an amazing story. Was there any communication while all this was going on with the other helicopter while you're going through all this? Or was it like, oh, nope, we see them and everybody just moves?
Yeah, it's interesting with things that you do in a situation like this and what makes you do them. We had lost a pilot. This was November that this happened. We had lost a pilot in January. And a whole crew, lost everybody on the crew. And to this day, we still don't know exactly what happened and why we lost them. And when I called to start the emergency procedure, you just say auto, 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 those 3 words. And so when I did that, I actually did it over the radio because in my head, I was like, I want everybody to know what happened.
Yes.
In case, right? And so they knew what we were doing. And they knew at that point that they needed to get themselves into a rescue position, which takes a minute to go through the checklist and do that. And they actually knew that was likely shortly before that because they called us up. They had seen sparks coming off the tail rotor, and so they knew something was up
Oh,
mechanically with the aircraft. So,
oh my goodness.
yeah, we were really
So
lucky to have them.
yeah, that was wow. That's definitely wingman award territory right there for being a solid wingman on that. That's such an amazing story. Well, I'm so thankful that you made it through that and that no one was injured and or everyone survived. And when you were when you were in between, was there ever a moment where you were like, where you really just checked what just happened? I mean, you literally flipped a helicopter over in the ocean and crash landed in the ocean in the dark and survived. To me, especially with all the events recently that's been in the news, that's incredible. Did you ever have a sense where it just set in on you after that, where it was like what I've just gone through, but made it out? Or when did that kind of set in? Was it in the water or was it like, no, it was like when we got back and I'm having a hot tea or something like that on the ship?
Yeah, I actually am not sure when I think it probably set in after I retired, right?
Mm,
And really telling this story with people like you and other
mm,
people who aren't in the community. And for me personally, you have to understand, like, my whole career up to this point, I was still a lieutenant. I was still young in my community, and I was one of very few women in my community. And so I was
mm,
really trying to fit in. That was really what I was trying to do. I wanted to
right.
be known as a pilot who was good at being a pilot, and that was it. And then this all happened, and immediately I was thrown into this, I don't, notoriety is the wrong word, but like people wanted to hear this story, as you can imagine, inside of
Of
our
course.
community. And so, I started telling that story, but there was a lot of discomfort with it because ultimately we were all just doing our job, and
Mm,
it wasn't something that I did on my own. All of us had to do everything right in order
mm.
for this to be a successful event that occurred. And so I think there was a lot of wrestling with all of those emotions that I was going through at the time that didn't really allow me to just enjoy that I was
Mm.
happy to be alive.
Yeah, yeah. There's just a lot of things coming at you very fast after that,
Yes.
because of
Yeah.
all the debriefs, then all the notoriety, and you were saying you were one of just a handful of or a few females in especially in your position, your role, and I could totally see how that would be like, "Hey, I just wanna be like one of the crew and fit in," and then all of a sudden and then this happens, you know? And now I've got a spotlight on me, and I don't necessarily know that, how this is gonna play out, and
Yes.
if I want it to play out. So, yeah, I could totally see that would be that's a challenging situation to navigate with for anybody, but much more than that, just where you are and what you were doing. But yeah, and your perspective on it. So I could totally see how that would be hard to wrestle with. When you look at that now with, I would say, even more perspective, I think there's so many things, and you're very humble to say, well, everybody, but you're leading the charge because I mean, you were the one that was there to train, and everybody's kind of looking at you. And also, I would say, just as a kudos to you, you did the debrief on that and changed the kind of the mindset of the person that you're going through on the procedure beforehand. And so definitely think you had a extremely large part in it going right. But I appreciate the fact that you're very wisely and acknowledging your team because everybody had to perform. But I think leadership is all about that. You're influencing the performance and you're building this trust. And obviously, the military has this kind of built in trust that we're going to trust the process, we're going to do the system, and we've got to execute flawlessly for these successful results. So there's so many things that I think come out of that story to me when you're talking. I'm just like, man, yes, ooh, yes, ooh, yes. But yeah, I think that's really great. So based on that, did that change when you came out of that experience, did it change what you wanted, or did that change anything about your desires in terms of career, in terms of training, in terms of flying? Or was it like, you know, I want to do more of this, or I want to do I don't want to see this for a while. How did that affect you in terms of your mindset?
So another funny part of the story is I remember vividly, I was attached to the hoist. You know, the helicopter's in a 70-foot hover. You're attached to a hoist. You get run up underneath the helicopter on this cable. And as I'm there with like the rotor wash beating down on me, I had one thought. And that thought was, I want a house, a dog, and a man. It had absolutely nothing to do with anything professionally. Like I knew there was more to life, and I wanted all of the things that are
Yes.
about life, right?
Wow.
And I loved flying,
Yeah.
especially on a bluebird day. It's springtime right now. When you look up, there's like maybe one or two white puffy clouds in the sky and the sun is shining on your face. Like going flying on a day like that there's nothing better, right?
There's not.
And I knew that I wanted, so I went out and I got those three things in that order. And so I think the thing that changed for me was just like, I'm ready. I'm ready for the rest of it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think your clarity in that is so interesting. It was like this experience definitely shaped your perspective, and it kind of brought up what was very important to you. And you said, I can totally see your vivid picture. You're underneath this helicopter, just getting blown to death, 70 foot off of complete black abyss in the middle of the ocean at night. This is ridiculous. And you're just sitting there and like, I want a house, a dog, and a man. And that's what's going through your head. That's just awesome because I could totally see that. There's just this clarity.
Mhm.
And I think that's just really cool because that really shaped your perspective on what you want and helped you craft your direction. Obviously, you're transitioning, seeing what's meaningful to you and getting those things. So I would love to thank you for sharing that, by the way. And I'm so thankful that it came out the way that it did. And I'm glad that you guys were all safe and that you executed flawlessly. So you've made it through this and you've transitioned. At some point, though, you talked about transitioning out of the military.
Mhm.
You love flying on nice, clear days, and you transitioned out of the military, though. You got this love for tech because you had that back at Notre Dame, and then you transition out. I'd love to talk a little bit about a couple things as we get into this more, and that is some of the things that you learned in the military, and whether they were specific to this very horrific crash or if they are just in general that you're bringing out, that you were able to bring out and apply into this new role in tech and in your current, as you're advising people now in executive coaching in the defense space, some things that we can talk about through that in terms of building trust on teams and things. But I also want to talk about some transitioning because you talked about transitioning from the military to that. And I think a lot that not only military listeners that's transitioning from military to private space can get from that conversation, but I think there's some that anybody that's transitioning, because you're transitioning in leadership, you're transitioning from one style to another. Anytime you're moving up in an organization or starting a new organization, you got some challenges there. So let's do the transitioning thing first. Let's talk about transitioning from the military, and that includes military to private life, but also leadership styles as well.
Yeah. Thanks. This is so much fun.
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm enjoying talking to you so much. And
Well,
thanks so
great.
much for the opportunity to bring this out as well.
Yeah.
So, me personally, transitioning from the military into civilian life was pretty bumpy. And I think
Right.
that is a theme that kind of runs through a lot of my friends, especially those who have spent a long time in the military.
Yes.
And so I think one thing that I try to tell everyone is to really take some time and give yourself the grace and the space to
Mm.
figure out who you are as a person without the military. So many of us really wrap our identities up in the military, but also anyone who's been in any sort of industry for a long time or even a short time, often people will tie their identity to the role that they are fulfilling. And the reason that's a little bit tough is because it's hard to take feedback, particularly constructive feedback,
Mm.
because you feel like it's about you as a person rather than about what you are doing performance wise in a role. I think particularly with coming out of the military, knowing who you are without the military is important, because when you take on that role, that may not be where your purpose is going to come from anymore. That might just be a job that you really enjoyed doing, but it may not give you that like purposeful feeling that you had when you were in the military. And so there are a couple of organizations that I think really help out in this space, especially. One of them is the Commit Foundation. And so they are really focused on supporting veterans in designing a purposeful life in their next steps after they come out of the military. And then there's also a relatively new organization called Beneath the Service. They have taken over what's called the Women's Veteran Leadership Program, and they're really focused on helping veterans integrate back into society. And right now, that women's program, since they took it over from another nonprofit organization, is built and a little bit further along, but their intention is to build that out for really any veteran. Having that community of women veterans just brings a little different space to have those conversations. As I mentioned, the only woman in the room, occasionally those experiences are a little bit different.
Sure.
But another mistake that I made that I think is really important to bring out to folks, when I went into my first role, I started that role without the grace and space. I started it while I was still technically on active duty in my terminal leave period. And I tried to minimize my service. And I didn't recognize just how much, not only my technical expertise from like flying, which was pertinent to what I was doing, but also just everything that I had learned around building trust, like you mentioned, how important strong relationships are to being able to build that trust, having transparency within an organization, giving feedback. I will never forget showing up to command. Certain levels of the organization hadn't received a lot of feedback, and they were really, really asking for feedback. And it was not that they needed a pat on the back or a confidence boost. They wanted to know what they could do better to be the best version of themselves. And so feedback really is a gift, right? And often we're so uncomfortable giving feedback to folks. But that was a lesson that I brought, that eventually I was able to bring into that software startup, that I think was helpful for a lot of the other folks in the organization. But that grace and space is important to really understand who you are and what you want to bring to the world. And then taking, it may be multiple steps. So finding the best next step to start moving you towards delivering that impact to the world that you want to deliver. And so for me personally, the Commit Foundation provided a coach, an executive coach that I could work with. I know a lot of your listeners are coaches. And the impact, I had never had a coach before. I didn't know what executive coaching was. And the impact that she had on me was just incredible. And it was so helpful. And I've actually gone back to her a number of times and worked with her to continue to work through different things. The second time I went to her, I had, on a delayed timeline, finally given myself that grace and space. And I left the tech startup. And so while we were working together, I had started teaching Pilates part-time. Becoming a comprehensive Pilates instructor was my COVID pressure relief valve. And that grace and space, I needed to do something. And so I started teaching Pilates. Every time an opportunity came my way, I was really focused on keeping the Pilates instruction. And so I worked with her to pull the thread on that and realized that I loved giving people those light bulb moments. It was something that I missed from teaching flying, and was able to do that through the Pilates. And that led me to executive coaching. And so, so that's how I ended up where I am now.
Military to Pilates to executive coaching. That's the path. That's that. No, I love that. And I think that's such good advice. We had another guest on that had retired from the military, and he gave very similar advice in the sense that he said, you have to find you have to understand what you loved about the military, and then craft that and build that into your life in other ways, knowing that it might not all come from the same place. And he was saying, like, for him, it was this camaraderie. He just loved the spirit of the Corps and the camaraderie that he received in the military. And he went to the job. Apparently it just wasn't there, or he was working startup by himself and he felt lost because he didn't have that camaraderie. And I just remember him saying the same thing. He went and found that in a group. Maybe he joined some type of extracurricular thing, that he had that camaraderie with these guys in this new space. It wasn't in his job or his role, but he went out and found that aspect. This is very similar. And I find it fascinating because you were like, I loved seeing light bulb moments go off. And that's really what you spent so much of your career in, that production side and training and teaching and coaching that inside the military. And it just felt natural, I think, to you, it sounds like, for you to love Pilates because you were doing the same thing with Pilates and ultimately now in executive coaching. So that's just it's that, like you said, you're pulling the thread, but there was a common thread through
Mhm.
all of that. So cool that you got to do that. And now you're weaving it all together because you're doing that and in defense and in tech and the light bulb and coaching. So you've got a lot of that going on. So I think that's really great. I would love to ask you this question because I think this is a valid question for business leaders. We have a client that we work with that's working with several different programs that hire veterans for their organization. So they're in the private sector, but they are working with several agencies that work with veterans to hire veterans on into their organization.
Mhm.
What advice would you give to businesses that are hiring vets that are coming into their organization? Because you've given some great advice to veterans. Do you have any advice that you would give to businesses to make that transition more successful on their side?
So that's such a great question. And I think there are a number of organizations that are starting to target that specifically with coaching services. I think this beneath the service nonprofit, I think that's what the reintegration is, right? Because as you land the job, it's figuring
Right.
out how you fit into that organization, and that can be tough. And so I
Yeah.
think providing the support after the connection begins with that company through coaching services, that's a great way to do it, I think, can be really super impactful to help veterans figure out how they can bring the best part of themselves to work and then
Yeah.
also balance doing that work with still doing other things like volunteering in order to drive that purposeful feeling as they
Yes.
really reintegrate into the workforce.
I think that's great. I think that's great advice. So, what I would say is the advice there is if you're a business owner or a business leader and you're working with services that are providing jobs for vets that are coming out of the service, don't just look at the initial connection as like, okay, we found this person and we feel like this is a great fit for our company. Take the next step and say, hey, as you're coming on board, we're going to provide coaching by pairing you up with like the beneath the service organizations and allow them to have a transition period where you're not only giving them this new transition into this new role, but actually partnering with them to transition into the private sector as a whole. I think that's really great advice. In fact, I'm going to share that with our clients to make sure that they're doing that because that's at the end of the day, we want everybody to be successful. We want the person transitioning out of the service to be successful in the private sector, and the business wants to have this new person be successful too. We're highly aligned with that. And so I think that's really great advice to do that. So I would love to talk to you about this because I mean, let's say that you're coming and engaging with a client now. You work with a lot of people in the defense sector and defense tech, and maybe there's some resistance because I can see, especially in the field of technology or in the field of any kind of technical, it's not just in defense, there is sometimes we get entrenched in our ways and we may have a technical background. We may have had some success as an organization. We may not value the human side of performance. You bring a different perspective to that. So if I was to say, Kelly, I appreciate your time, but we've just got a lot going on right now. And I think we're doing pretty good and we've been successful to this point. How would you speak to them as it relates to performance and building trust and high performing teams in their organization? Maybe why they may be missing something in terms of if they're not engaging at that level.
Yes. And so one piece of my story that I left out is I love executive coaching, and I felt like there was a big part of myself that I wasn't able to bring to that leader to help them understand the dynamics of the organization. So,
Mm,
organization development or HR strategy consulting can be really helpful in these situations because if a leader were to tell me that, I would ask them, how do you know? How do you
mm,
know what you're doing is working?
mm,
And we approach that with data collection, and it's data collection from a qualitative perspective as well as a quantitative perspective. There's conversations around what metrics make the most sense to see if we've been successful, if we measure 6 months after this engagement together. Things like employee turnover or employee engagement or employee absenteeism. Survey data can help to collect that. But I have a few things that are like foundational to how I like to do business in this space. And one of them is no survey should take more than 7 to 10 minutes to fill out. It's going to get you way too much data if it's any longer than that. And you want to stay really focused on what question you're trying to answer, right? The other thing is each organization is unique and wonderful. And getting to know that specific organization and their goals is really important at the start of the engagement because maybe employee turnover is actually desired at that point in the organization's journey. They want to get some new folks in. Maybe the organization is at such an inflection point that the people that have brought it to that point are actually not aligned with where the organization needs to go. A great example is a startup that's been throwing things at the wall and innovating and now has decided on the one direction that it wants to take. Those people who are really good at innovating and being creative and coming up with new ideas might not be super happy about focusing on the direction one idea that's gained traction and going that way. And so I think, how do you know is my big question for them. And I think it's important to invite the employee base into the conversation so that you can get a really solid answer to that. And then also get a lot of buy-in around what direction the company is going to go in, particularly if you're embarking on any sort of change effort. And let's be honest, like, if you're a business, you're embarking on a change effort.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. Very true. Yeah, no, I think that is very true. And it's so true, especially just getting the feedback. I think that sometimes as leaders, one of the things that we lack in organizations is honest feedback. And I loved how you said that feedback is a gift. And I think that it also ties into accountability, because when we get feedback, we are sometimes getting it in the form of accountability. And I think we've talked about on the show before how accountability sometimes has a black eye associated with it, because it seems like this big brother that somebody is going to catch me doing something wrong. And then I'm getting this feedback on how I'm supposed to do better. And it feels like a negative thing. In what we like to do is say that usually if it feels negative, or there's negative connotation to that, it's because something is off. We've got to fix the system and fix the people and show that we care a little bit more, because if accountability is done correctly, it actually should be something that is seen as something I'm giving you feedback and holding you accountable because I care. If I didn't care, you wouldn't hear from me. And so if we can flip the script a little bit, I think that, to your point, feedback is a gift. So as executives, leaders, as coaches and organizations, if we're not getting honest feedback on a consistent basis in meaningful ways, then we've got a real problem, because we're flying blind. And I think that's really dangerous. So I love your point to that.
If I actually, can I just jump in real quick?
Yeah, 100%.
To add one thing, you mentioned the aspect of giving feedback because we care. I think there's also an element of not only do we care, we believe that you can do better.
Ooh,
that, I think that is one of the things that really can shift the conversation. If you're starting from this place of, I am taking the time to have this conversation with you because I know that you can contribute in the way that we need you to contribute. And then the other flip side of accountability is, the reason why accountability is so important is because if you have expectations in your organization and someone is not living up to those expectations, everyone else that is living up to those expectations is having a hard time coming to work every day and continuing to do the work to allow them to live up to the expectations, right? And so, yes, accountability is so important, and I could not agree with you more.
I think that it just, to your point, and that is so fascinating because it's so true. That is essentially what coaching is a lot of. It's just pointing out things, and it's really battling for belief. Like, I see you, and I see the potential that you have. I believe that you have it. I want you to believe that you have it. And then we're going to talk about how you can achieve it and pull that into reality. And I think that so much of that is related to coaching, whether that's internal or external, and internal to the company or external to the company, coach, outside coach coming in. It's just sharing that belief, but it's also sharing the need. And I think from an individual standpoint, the reason that's so powerful to the individual is that we all want to be developed. We want to feel, I believe there's an innate desire for us to feel like we're meeting that potential, that we're rising, that we're growing. Usually when people stop, they feel like they're in a rut, or they'll say, I just feel stagnant. I'm stuck. I'm in a rut. And as a leader coming and engaging your team members, or as a coach engaging your team members, by giving them feedback and calling them to this higher standard of excellence, this potential that you see in them, you're saying that you care, and you're showing it because you're saying, this is what I see that I believe that you can do. And I think that it lifts everyone. It has the ability to lift everyone, because now they have something to charge after, and they know that you're for them enough to help point that out to them and help them get there. And I think that really does a lot for the culture of the team. And it really goes back to when you were talking about going in that helicopter, in that moment where you realize this is not going the way we had hoped, and this is a more serious problem than what we originally anticipated. You just made a comment that there's no time to talk about it. Is that success in that moment, when it really counted, success in that moment had a lot to do with everything that was understood and known by all parties involved, and that they executed flawlessly in that moment. And I think there's so many times in business where we make assumptions on certain things, and we just assume things are happening or should be happening, or somebody will step up, and we haven't been clear and given the feedback and accountability necessary on the front side. And so then we don't get the results that we want on the backside, and we go, well, that's surprising. But on the flip side, it's like, well, man, it's just like your story. You were going through briefings on this crash before you even got into the helicopter, on the literal thing that went wrong, because that happened so many times. And so I think as leaders in any organization, in whether it's military or private sector, I think there's so many lessons in that, is addressing these common issues, giving feedback, getting feedback on common things that we can engage in to make sure that everybody's performing with excellence. So I think you're just spot on. So many things that you've shared that are just really great. We've had just the best conversation. Thank you for sharing just some really great wisdom. If a leader is wanting to build trust in their organization or their organizational culture, what advice would you give them? Because I know you work with a lot of people in the defense tech space and startups and all these folks, but you've had the experience of leading some great teams and commanding some great teams in the military. So I would trust your judgment. What advice would you give leaders in the private sector in that?
Yeah, I think primarily back to that relationships piece, right? Never underestimate the value of 20 minutes and a cup of coffee, right? To talk about anything besides work. Because I think that creates this deeper understanding of the people that you're working with and builds connection. And I think connection, for a team to have a really strong, high level of trust, there needs to be this connective tissue among the members. So that never
I love it.
underestimate that cup of coffee and 20.
Yeah. So deepen the understanding. You said deepen the understanding. So if you want to have a higher level of trust, never underestimate. I love how you put that. Never underestimate the power of connection. Never underestimate the power of connection. That's really great. And we're so much in line with that. And we agree with that. In fact, that's really what we that's really what we were trying to do with our one-on-one coaching system. And for those that are listening that are active users of our one-on-one coaching system, you never underestimate. We literally say it's 20 minutes once a month to sit down with a person. That's literally what we say is 20 minutes. The one-on-one takes 20 minutes. And so I'm so thankful that is your perspective as well, just to sit down with your people once a month or whenever you can for 20 minutes and a cup of coffee and go over some things that may or may not be related to work so that you can deepen that connection and that trust, so you can build trust. So thank you, Kelly. It's just been the best conversation. Thank you for being on the show. How can people connect with you if they want to engage with you, especially if they're in the defense tech space, but even if they're just as an executive and they want to hear more about what you're doing in your organization, how can they connect with you?
Well, thanks, Dallas, for having me on the show and for your expert podcast hosting and able to pull out the answer to the question, even if I don't always end with an exact point. So I really appreciate having the opportunity to come on and talk to you. As far as reaching out to me, I would love to connect with any of your listeners. And I would say the easiest way, if they're on LinkedIn, LinkedIn is a really easy way to connect with me. My handle, after the LinkedIn.com/in/ is Kelly Natter Harrison. The other thing is my website, so mindfullycraftedsolutions.com. There's a contact page, and you can reach out to me through that as well. And so I think those are probably the two easiest ways to get in touch.
That's fantastic. If you're driving, no worries. We'll put this in the show notes. So we'll put both of those links in the show notes, as well as some links to the nonprofits that you mentioned earlier, which would be, the Commit and also Beneath the Service. So Commit Foundation, Beneath the Service. We'll try to get those links as well if you want to check them out and have more details. All right. We always end the show by asking our guest who they would like to hear on the last 10%. So if you were going to listen to the show, who is someone that you would like to hear as a guest on the last 10%?
Yes, I would love to hear Jill Hinton Wolf. She recently published a book called Mission, Tribe, and Grace, focused on the veterans' journey, basically, in finding those things both in service and then again afterwards. And she is just an incredible human being, and I'd love to see her here.
Okay. All right. We'll have to reach out to Jill, and we will see if we can get her on the last 10%. That sounds like, I love the title, Mission, Tribe, and Grace. That's a really great title. I love that. We'll reach out to Jill and see if we can have her on the last 10%. But Kelly, thank you again for being on the show, and we wish you the best and look forward to maybe having you on again in the future.
Thank you, Dallas. Happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us today on the last 10%. We hope you found today's content engaging and encouraging. Remember to subscribe to the podcast to hear the latest episodes, and help us out by rating and reviewing us so others will join our community. We release new episodes every other Tuesday. This podcast can be found globally in any podcasting app, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Amazon. Subscribe today. Plus, visit our website, join our email list, and discover resources and info for your business and team at thinkmovethrive.com. Thanks again for listening to The Last 10%.